What the ANC has touched over the past 30 years, the ANC has left dust behind it. How do you form a coalition government with a party that says the elections have been rigged and we are going to court? If the EFF had been brought into government, there would have been an economic crisis in South Africa. The DA is a party of white South Africans. Full stop. This coalition government will not do more. It's not possible for it to do more. So the ANC will get below 30% in 2029.
Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. And today I'm very glad to be joined by political analyst Prince Mashele, who's no stranger to this channel. Thank you very much for joining us once again.
Thanks for inviting me, and greetings to viewers.
It's a great pleasure to have you. Our first chat was very big, so we've got a high bar to clear.
No, it's because you are famous. I'm riding on your fame. Thank you.
I mean, one doesn't know where to start with our country. Last time we spoke, it was before the election. But maybe we can start here, because you wrote a book with Mzugisi Qobo in 2012, which we were just talking about. And I was just remembering that you predicted the fall of the ANC. And at the time, you were branded as a heretic for even suggesting such a thing could happen. And the 2024 election vindicated that book's perspective.
Yeah, we with Mzu and other members of the Midrand group.
Oh, the famous Midrand.
The famous or infamous Midrand group. We used to have very lengthy political discussions. And discussions about the direction of our country. And what I can say this without fear of contradiction is that as members of the Midrand group, and I know all of them, as a group, we love South Africa. We are patriots. So we would have these long discussions about where our country is going. And at some point, we understood that societies always pivot on a hegemonic force. So there is always a hegemonic force on which societies pivot. And we knew that the ANC since 1994 had been that pivot. So the health of the ANC would be reflected in the health or ill-health of the country. So around the 2010s, early 2010s, we felt a sense that the wheels in the ANC had come off. And we had discussions, and we said, this thing has begun to fall. That is the ANC. And Mzu and I went on to write a book. But here is what we saw. One, around that time, the ANC was no longer respected by ordinary South Africans. When we listen to discussions on radio, we listen to discussions in taxis, at funerals, we could hear what people were saying about the leadership of the ANC. People were beginning to think of the leadership of the ANC as scoundrels, as thieves, as corrupt chaps. So at the level of public psychology, the ANC at that time had fallen. And then we said, secondly, this certainly at some point will be followed by an electoral fall. And I remember, by the way, having a discussion with Mzu as we were writing that book. Because I insisted that let us project from that time. I said, let's project about 10 years into the future. And I said to Mzu, in 10 years, the ANC is going to lose an election. We had a long discussion. And I said, why don't we say it boldly that in 2024, the ANC will be out of power? And Mzu was hesitant about it. And I prevailed that we said, now, electorally, it will lose an election. So that was our projection. Obviously, we are political scientists. We relied on our scientific methods to project and all of that. And at that time, the ANC unleashed a massive force against us.
Wow.
We were declared persona non grata in the ANC. were discussed at NEC meetings. Strategies were developed against us. And people were deployed to counter us. So wherever we went, the ANC deployed senior leaders to go and counter us. I remember we had a very tense public discussions in East London. The ANC sent its Secretary General at the time, Gwede to come and disrupt us.
Wow.
And,
so he actually came to the venue, or?
Yes, he came to the venue. He was actually on the panel. He said, I am coming myself. Wow. He was there on the panel to say that we're talking, to tell us that we're talking nonsense. Of course, we stood our ground. And you can ask the question, who was right? Was Gwede and his ANC right at the time? Or were we right? And history is there to judge.
How do you interpret the ANC's fall? The fact that it now has happened, as one of the people who was first to declare that it would happen publicly. I mean, last year, I don't think so much happened after the election that we haven't really sat with just the ANC's electoral decline and what that means.
You see, this is a very complex question. And obviously I follow political discourse in the public domain. And most of us as commenters were very glib about it because we don't seem to appreciate the historical weight and meaning of the fall of the ANC.
Yeah,
and you know, this is typical of human beings. The living never appreciate the depth of their moment. It's posterity that looks back and say, wow, what was happening then?
Meanwhile, to us, it just feels like a normal day.
Yeah, but here is how I see interpret the fall of the ANC. Is that, number one, all empires come and go. That's a rule of history. There is no empire that lasts forever.
Yeah.
Number two, there is a time when every empire is fully in charge. Number three, related to the second observation, is that when an empire is fully in control of society, its demise is unimaginable. So that sums up the life of the ANC since 1994 up to where we are. At some point, the ANC was fully in charge. Nobody imagined that this empire could come down crumbling. But then the question is, how did it crumble? And interestingly, by the way the ANC empire crumbled is not different from the crumbling of most empires in history. And you will see how this relates to history. So if you were to, the ANC, by the way, crumbled because of three factors. And these three factors, by the way, you will find even in the crumbling of the Roman Empire. One, corruption. Two, internal ructions, infighting. Three, incompetence. These are the three factors that explain how the ANC came down crumbling. Go back to the Roman Empire. You will find these three factors. One, incompetence. You see, the first 15 years masked the incompetence of the ANC after 1994. Why? There was a small group of ANC leaders who were in charge of both the ANC and the country, and they projected two things. They projected moral integrity, and two, they projected an element of technical expertise. But the biggest thing that they had in huge reserves was moral integrity.
Yeah, sure.
So Mandela, for example, was a man of vast moral integrity. So the idea that Mandela may have been incompetent technically in running a state or running an organization, you wouldn't say that, because if you said so, you would be lynched. How could you say the great Mandela is technically incompetent? But here's the thing. it was possible for Nelson Mandela to be incompetent. Why? He had never run an organization. The man had spent his life in prison. So if you have no experience in running something, it's actually not a bad reflection on you. It simply says you don't have that experience of running something. So there was incompetence on the part of the ANC. But there is someone who even complicated this picture for us as South Africans, Thabo Mbeki. Because Thabo Mbeki is an intellectual, and he projected his intellectual force to society on behalf of the ANC. As a result, we tended to think that the ANC was technically competent. When actually, if you removed the few guys at the top, the whole thing actually would have been exposed as an incompetent bunch. These people they spent their lives in exile, spending long days reading Karl Marx, Das Kapital. Others were really yawning the whole day under a tree. I mean, people like those. No, this is exactly how it happened. But people will never tell you this way. But those who were in exile actually know what I'm talking about. I mean, they were not even in communication with each other. Some fellows were in London, others were in Moscow, others were in Lusaka. These fellows, on a given day, they didn't know what others were doing on the other side. They would wait for a letter to come after 8 months. Now, these people actually were not being trained to run a country. So that's technical competence. And judge the record of the ANC. Here is the record of the ANC.
Yeah.
Look at every city that the ANC has run over the past 30 years. Every city, without fail. You can take Polokwane, you can take Nelson Mandela Bay, you can take Johannesburg, you can take Mbombela. Let me tell you, what the ANC has touched over the past 30 years, the ANC has left dust behind it.
Sure.
That reflects that the ANC has been technically incompetent. It was given good roads. Look at the roads now. If you minus highways, there is hardly a road in South Africa, by the way, where the ANC has been running municipalities, where there are no potholes. Any and everything that the ANC has touched, it has crumbled. So the second thing is corruption. Look, and this corruption thing, by the way, again, it's not peculiar to the ANC.
Sure.
All societies in the past have grappled with this corruption thing. So in other words, the ANC is not the only party in the world that has got human beings who are temptable. Yeah.
Even the National Party.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's a book, by the way, by a Chinese activist, Cadres and Corruption. Go and read that book. I mean, this chap was arrested and all of that, but he was actually telling the truth. Even the Chinese Communist Party battled with this thing of comrades emerging from the fight, occupying offices, wanting to live in big houses, wanting to drive big cars, wanting to have young girls as girlfriends and drinking expensive whiskey. Even Walter Rodney, by the way, how Europe underdeveloped Africa. Somewhere in that book, by the way, you'll find this stuff about whiskey and perfume and stuff. So the ANC fellows did not manage to prevent their comrades from being tempted by money. So they moved. The first phase, by the way, of the ANC is this. The best and the brightest, they went to parliament because they thought that is the site for power. And then they began to deploy a few of them to state-owned enterprises. And those who went to state-owned enterprises, when the comrades who had remained in parliament visited them in their homes, they realized that swimming pools, big houses, they realized those who were in parliament, we need to get out of parliament very quickly and go into the state proper so that we can steal. So that was the second thing. First, it's incompetence. Second, it's corruption. So that's how the ANC eventually crumbled, because they focus on stealing. So as that was happening, obviously, I have been an observer of South African politics. I could see At every stage, this is where the ANC is, and eventually it's going to fall. So the ANC has fallen. It's as I said before, it's now being buried by Cyril Ramaphosa. We must now imagine the country without the ANC.
Do you think there's any path for them to come back?
It's not possible. Here's the thing. Once empires fall, and I like to use historical prisms because they are pregnant with lessons. Once empires fall, they never come back. You can take the Roman Empire. Did it come back? No. You can take the British Empire. Is there evidence that the British Empire will ever come back? No.
Sure.
You can take empires earlier, the Ottoman Empire. Even the Chinese Empire, by the way, it's actually not coming back because the rise of China should never be interpreted as the rise or the return of an earlier empire. Because the Confucian Empire, which is the first empire, didn't actually rule the world. It was actually inward looking. It actually ruled China. It didn't extend its tentacles beyond China. So the latest rise in terms of the Chinese empire, it's not the earlier empire. And in fact, the second China doesn't have the characteristics of the first empire. So the point I'm making is this: no empire comes back. Once it exits the stage, it exits it permanently. So the ANC as an empire must never entertain the delusions of some kind of a second return.
The coalition government that we have is probably the biggest thing that happened last year on the political scene after the election. What do you make of the decision to form this government? And do you think it was a wise decision on the part, let's say, of the ANC first?
Yeah, look, I have said it when this thing... Firstly, I predicted that there would be an ANC government coalition after the elections, and people thought I had smoked marijuana, and it happened. Secondly, when it was formed, I said this is the best thing under the circumstances.
Sure.
Because I looked at all the possible scenarios and I saw doomsday. So I maintain my position. It's a coalition government between the DA and the ANC. This government of national unity nonsense is propaganda by Cyril Ramaphosa and them.
Sure.
It's a coalition government between the ANC and the DA. Under the circumstances, I repeat it, it is the best thing under the circumstances. Why? Let's lay down the scenarios on the table. Scenario number one is the ANC and the MK.
Yeah.
Because remember, the ANC was the biggest party after the elections, 40%.
Yeah.
And then the MK was the third biggest party, 14%. So if you had skipped the DA, the ANC and the MK could possibly have formed a coalition government.
Sure.
But there are two complications, by the way, with regard to that. One is a technical complication. The second one is a moral complication.
Right.
Let's start with the technical complication. The MK party at the time didn't recognize the results of the elections. And people forget this, by the way. The MK party said the elections had been rigged and it was running to court to challenge the elections. How do you form a coalition government with a party that says the elections have been rigged and we are going to court to challenge them? It's impossible. And people forget this part. So that scenario was out of the picture. The second aspect is the moral complication. You see, and here people can lynch me if they want, but I'll tell you what I think anyway.
Please, by all means.
The MK party is actually a collection of state capture forces. If you look at all of the people who prominent people who appeared before the Zondo Commission accused of state capture. And by the way, there are tons and tons of evidence that during state capture, money was stolen from the state, number one. Number two, state-owned enterprises were actually collapsed. This is not some opinion. It's concrete evidence. Most of those figures who were in charge of state-owned enterprises, whether Brian Mulife, Montana, and all of them. My sincere apologies, I thought I had switched off my phone. I'm sorry about that.
No, please.
Let me switch it off. All of those.
Maybe it was Brian Mulefe calling you.
I'll talk to him after.
Yeah.
So all of those characters have flocked in the direction of MK. So if you say, including Jacob Zuma himself, because he was the chief of state capture, by the way, working with the Guptas. I mean, the Guptas did what they did because of their proximity to Jacob Zuma. Full stop. There's no debate about it. They would never have done that if they didn't have the kind of access that they had to Jacob Zuma. So how do you form a coalition government with such forces, especially if, as the ANC, you are sending a message to society that you are renewing yourself? So that was a moral complication. So that's the first scenario. The second scenario, and the DA would be the third scenario, would have been the ANC, the EFF, and others. Because the ANC and the EFF alone would not have been able to form a coalition government. The numbers would not have been sufficient. So it would have been the ANC, EFF, and others. Even the EFF would have been problematic morally, by the way. Why? Remember that at the time, stories had circulated linking the leadership of the EFF to corruption. VBS, for example. There was a report that came out. There was a confession by Ndlozi, and so on and so forth. So to form a coalition with such a bunch of people who are accused of serious corruption morally would have been difficult for society to embrace. So that also would have been a problem. But also there was, with regard to the EFF, ANC and others, there was also a technical problem. The technical problem would have been, if the EFF had been brought into government, there would have been an economic crisis in South Africa. The investors most probably would have pulled out their money. You can decide in the comfort of your armchair to say, to hell with investors, let them pull out their money. You can say so. But let me tell you, in the real world, what happens when investors pull out their money? They leave a trail of misery and agony, not for the elite, but for ordinary people. This to hell with investors story, we've seen it in Africa, by the way. Don't go far. Go to Zim. The ZANU-PF leadership at some point went mad, and they said to hell with investors. The elite haven't suffered the consequences, but ordinary people have suffered the consequences of disinvestment from Zim. Zimbabweans have scattered all over the world. So there was a real question in front of the ANC, Ramaphosa and them, and say, do we want misery and agony to befall our own people? If they had bitten the bullet and said we are going to go with the EFF, millions of South Africans now would be suffering. Even the middle class, by the way, would actually suffer. There would have been hyperinflation and all the consequences that would flow from that. So those are the scenarios. So the DA and the ANC, so far, it has not been a great marriage, but they have stabilized things a little bit. So no hyperinflation. Investors haven't pulled out of South Africa en masse. There's a bit of load shedding. It's not there. There is a bit of positive sentiment on the part of South Africans.
Yeah, quite a lot.
Yeah. So I think that if you are a rational observer, unless if you are mad, you can't run away from the fact that at least this coalition between the ANC and the DA has been a shock absorber. It has not propelled South Africa to greater heights, and I don't think that will happen because the damage that the ANC has done over the past 30 years is so massive that it will take a serious technical revolution to fix.
What about the moral problems with the DA? I hear you on MK and the EFF, but some would say, well, even though the DA doesn't have the same moral problems, the stance that they've taken on certain issues, or the history of the party and its links, for example, and merging with the National Party at one point in its history, which the ANC also did, by the way, or embraced them. There are also those questions about, which you may have heard from the SACP, which cast this as some kind of sellout deal on behalf of the ANC.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, let's face it, the DA has serious moral questions to be answered.
Sure.
I've said it before, and the DA people don't like it because they don't like the truth. Here is the truth about the DA. The DA is a party of white South Africans. Full stop. And then they respond and say, yeah, but look at the results. Who voted for the DA? Whites are not enough to give us that kind of an outcome.
Yeah, the most diverse party.
It's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. Here is how you assess the character of a party. One, you look at who runs it, right? Yeah. You look at who runs it. Let me give you an analogy. If, for example, we are in a vehicle, you and I and others, right? You are the driver, right? And I'm sitting somewhere in the back seat and my friends, and we're enjoying a good beer and we're drunk, right? The police stop us. They are not going to say this is a party of drunk people because the driver is sound. So the driver matters.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, and we as passengers, we don't actually determine when the car is going. Yeah, we're mere passengers. You as the driver, you are the one who determines where the car is going.
Yeah.
It is your car when you're in control of it. Black people who have voted for the DA are not in control of the DA. The DA is controlled by a small clique of white people who sit in Cape Town. They are the ones who plot the direction of the party, including how to fashion propaganda that will make people believe that the DA is a diverse party. In the first place, if you want to check, go back. When the DA was formed, the white people who formed it didn't invite black people to the room. Remember? There was the DP, there was a federal party, there was the national party, elements of the national party. They did not invite black people when they formed the DA. Why? Because they didn't want black people to be there to spoil their party. So from the beginning, there was no illusion about it that the DA is a white party. So, how do we reckon with the DA's inclusion in current politics and future politics? The DA as a party must demonstrate that it is no longer a white party. It is a party for all South Africans, black and white. Once it does that, it would have gotten rid of its moral dilemma, these moral complications we are talking about. So what does that mean? If you want to test my theory, and the DA, if they watch this, go to their headquarters in Cape Town and go look if there are black people there in serious positions. Strategists, those who hold offices in that party, let me tell you, black people are on the margins. If there are black people there, they are probably cleaners, or maybe a secretary or two. But just look, you will see that this is a white party. So the DA has got a task in front of it itself. Open up the party. Let credible, intelligent whites and blacks sit around the same table and run the party together. Then we can talk about who supports you.
Yeah.
That's not happening currently in the DA. But here is the thing. By the way, I believe in the Freedom Charter. It's nail my colors. That South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. I am not more of a South African than a white South African. Sure. In any case, by the way, if you look at the history of South Africa, by the way, most of us, black and white, actually originated outside the current borders of South Africa. Most blacks come from Central Africa. My grandfather came from up east in Mozambique, and through migration came here, and my father was born here, and so on. Even white people came here, the same process. So we must acknowledge each other, black and white, that we belong here. But nobody must think that the one is superior to the other. So in other words, the whites in the DA must never think of themselves as superior. They're just like you and I. Until they are courageous enough to be that humble, they will always have a moral cloud hanging upon them. Even the good things that they're doing, by the way, will not be acknowledged.
Yeah.
Such as good governance in the Western Cape. I mean, the DA, let us not make a mistake. We can get into discussions about Kalisha, this and that.
Yeah.
It is currently the best government. If you look at all the municipalities in South Africa, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, let's assume that what you say is correct on the shock absorbing, as you say, of the GNU, that of all the options, of all the imperfect options, this was the best one. What do you think about the coalition government and how it's performed so far? And do you see that it will be able to do more than just absorb the shock? Because one can feel that there's a certain relief in the country. The election is over. There's a new government. At least now we can all go forward. But sooner or later, it seems to me, I could be wrong, people will start expecting more than just this stability. They're going to want to see progress. And I suppose maybe this year, that's going to be the test for this government.
Here's the thing. And South Africans will lynch me for saying what I'm going to say now, but I'll say it. This coalition government will not do more. It's not possible for it to do more. And I'll explain. You see, this thing about coalition governments is it's relatively old in Western Europe. And an interesting country, by the way, is Germany. Germany has been under coalition governments for a very long time. Merkel actually was a leader of a coalition government for a very long time. But you see, the Europeans, Western Europeans in particular, could afford to have a coalition government that does basics without damaging that society. Why? Because those are developed societies economically.
Sure.
So when you have a country that is developed like Germany, which is number one in Europe, it's not addressing a backlog of development. It is simply managing things so that things don't get derailed. But the economy is well-oiled. People have jobs. There's a social welfare system that is working. So if the politicians can just stay calm in the headquarters, that's fine. The Germans are happy. But you see, in South Africa, we are not blessed with that kind of a situation. We've got a huge developmental backlog. South Africa is a country of two nations, to quote Thabo Mbeki. You've got a first world, which is actually a smaller part of South Africa. But you have a big underclass. Now, the problem is this. In this coalition government, you've got the DA representing the first world. So if things were to remain the way they are, the DA would have no problem, because its constituency, whites, in the main, are okay. They don't live in shacks. They don't live in informal settlements. They are actually not unemployed. They are fine. So if the thing keeps on going like that, the DA is happy. But then the other side, that is the component that represents the underclass, black people, unemployed, uneducated, hopeless, living in formal settlements, and all of that stuff, is the ANC that is supposed to represent that component. But the ANC has gone mad. It's no longer representing. So the tensions between the ANC and the DA. The DA is sincere and honest in representing its constituents. The ANC is insincere and corrupt. It no longer represents the black underclass. So the DA will pull to the right. The ANC is supposed to pull to the left. But the ANC, as I said, it has gone mad. So it's not pulling in any direction.
It's pulling and in all directions.
Exactly. So the result is there will be no radical movement. It's a stalemate. It's a stalemate. So South Africa will begin to move the day there is no longer a stalemate. So either the forces of the right take over and take the South African economy and South African society in the right direction, or the forces of the left take over and take the South African economy and the South African society in the left direction. That's when we're going to see movement. Or you have a centrist force that emerges that is going to take South Africa in a centrist direction. But this is not going to happen, not in the next 15 to 20 years. South Africa will be governed by a coalition government for a minimum of 15 years going forward. And what does that mean?
Another prediction here.
Yeah, it means that all the problems that we're grappling with of unemployment, lack of economic growth, will be with us for at least 15 years. By the way, even longer, because if you look at what the ANC has done, the ANC has broken the backbone of the South African economy. What is the backbone of the South African economy? And people don't understand this stuff. The backbone of the South African economy are state-owned enterprises. That's how they were conceived and conceptualized, by the way, by the Afrikaners. Starting not in 1948, because people think the Afrikaners have been in charge of South Africa since 1948. It's not true. By the way, there has never been any English prime minister of South Africa since 1910. From 1910 all the way to 1994, the leader of South Africa has always been Afrikaner. And the leader who actually conceptualized state-owned enterprises as the backbone of the South African economy it's not someone who led South Africa after 1994. It is actually Jan Smuts. If you think of how Eskom was conceptualized, Eskom first existed in the head of Jan Smuts. He invited Hendrik van der Bijl, a scientist, an Afrikaner scientist who was practicing science in the US. And he said, come back and create a state-owned enterprise to provide cheap electricity in order to kickstart industrialization in South Africa. And ISCO was born and the IDC was born and so on. So that's how state-owned enterprises were conceptualized to be the backbone of South, to provide cheap services to the economy in order for the economy to thrive. What did the ANC do? They went straight for that backbone and destroyed it. Let me tell you, it's going to take many years to rebuild that. Most of the problems we are grappling with now, ArcelorMittal is leaving. Of course, there are international competition issues and so on. But part of the reason why ArcelorMittal is leaving is precisely because Transnet, which is our national logistics company, has been broken. It can no longer provide the kinds of services that those who are mining in South Africa need. So here is the thing. It's going to take a long time for the South African economy to come back. In order for it to come back, there has to be a force that takes over the state and takes South Africa in a particular direction. And that force must have legitimacy, and it must also have electoral support by the majority of South Africans so that it can be confident to lead this country in a specific direction. If you have coalitions, it's not going to happen.
And that could be quite dangerous for the ANC and the DA if this arrangement doesn't actually deliver on people's hopes, because there are quite a lot of hopes invested in it right now.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Broken societies don't cease to exist. Keep this in mind. You can say it will be dangerous for the ANC or for the DA. That's fine. But someone is going to get elected in 2029. And my guess is this. The DA is here to stay. I don't see the DA declining in 2029. Although I don't see it growing exponentially.
Yeah.
So I see it playing between 20% and 25% in that space. And by the way, that represents growth for the DA if you look at where the DA comes from.
Yeah, absolutely, sure.
I see the ANC declining, falling below 30% in 2029.
29,
yes,
they're going
yes.
10 points further down.
Now, where do they come from? They're now sitting at 40%, right?
49,
They come from 57%.
Yeah.
So what I'm talking about, by the way, it's actually nothing compared to where the ANC comes from.
Sure.
So the ANC will decline first. Remember, the ANC is exiting the political scene.
Wow.
So the ANC will get below 30% in 2029. And there is nothing the ANC can do, by the way, to reverse its fortunes. Because the verdict has been delivered. We now know, after 30 years, that the ANC is a corrupt party, is also an incompetent party, and is also an immoral party. So the verdict is clear. Nothing will change that. Nobody who leads the ANC now will reverse that. Even Cyril Ramaphosa has failed to reverse that trajectory. Because Cyril Ramaphosa himself, by the way, is not a saint. I mean, if you think of Palapal, you know what Cyril did, by the way, with those dollars? If I did it, people would be coming to greet me in prison. If I did it. He didn't go to jail simply because he's the president of a country. But that he is corrupt, we all know. There's no question about it. So the ANC, it's history. The DA is here to stay. But the DA, in my view, will never be a leader of South Africa for as long as those who run it continue to believe that they're superior to black people and they don't open up for credible black leaders to sit with credible white leaders and plot how to take this country forward. Remember, you can go back to history. That is the moment where the erstwhile enemies reached. The Afrikaners and the English, they had fought before until they realized that actually the solution is for us to sit around the same boardroom and plot how we're going to co-govern this country. So unless and until white people genuinely, not this condescending stuff, when a white person is talking nonsense, a credible black person must tell that white person you're talking nonsense without there being anything. When a black person is talking nonsense, a credible white person must say, yes, you're talking nonsense without there being moral this and moral that. You need to get to a moment where, as South Africans, we are genuine and honest to each other. We look each other in the eye and say, you two are talking nonsense. I don't care that you are white or I don't care that you are black. So the DA is refusing to get to that point. That's why they will be stuck in the 20s. They will not lead South Africa. And the longer they get stuck in that space, the greater the prospects of a party that is going to emerge claiming and legitimately, by the way, being welcomed by the majority of black people and viewing whites as the enemy. And if that happens, in the end, the DA would have committed crime against its own constituency. So the DA must think strategically in the long term. If they don't act now, I can tell you their great-grandchildren will pay the price.
Fam, before we get back to the episode, we just want to let you know we have a big goal on this channel to build this community to 1,000 members. That means we have 2 new levels of SMWX membership. The first level gives you exclusive access to content, discounts on merch, but the second level, in addition to various other perks, gives you access to me. We're going to have meetups, online sessions. You're going to get discount on our live events. So if you want to deepen your SMWX community experience, help us get to that 1,000 member level. Look forward to seeing you there. The MK party, of course, is one of the key features of South African politics in the last year or so. Of course, they emerged onto the scene getting around 14%, led by former President Jacob Zuma, who's no stranger to the South African political scene, shall we say. What do you think, we should be thinking about the MK party this year? And what do you think 2025 means for the MK party as it enters its second year of existence?
Again, I'll go back to my history script. Because you see, if you don't follow a history script, you get dismissed glibly by idiots who don't understand how societies evolve. And I will explain the MK historically, and I'm going to borrow the example of China. So in China, the Qing dynasty falls. In 1911, there's excitement when it falls. In 1911, there are elections in China. People actually have no idea that happened. There were elections in China. And the forces that rush to jump into that space, they thought that they were the forces of the future in China. The liberal Democrats of Yan Sen-Tzu thought we are the ones who are taking over that. They did not know that history doesn't work that way. All of those forces, by the way, that jumped into that space after the 1911 elections in China, didn't lead China into the future.
Yeah, very interesting.
Those who led China actually were the communists who were not players during that transition.
Yeah.
They came late in 1949.
After the nationalists.
Yeah. There was a civil war. There was warlordism in China from around 1916 after the elections. There was chaos. China stabilized from 1949 onwards. Those who stabilized China were kids when the chaos happened. So I see MK, they're excited. Everyone is running there. They think they are the ones who are going to get into the space because we're in a transition and they will lead South Africa. Floyd and them, they think, we are the future leaders of South Africa. Leave and I leave. It's not going to happen. These fellows don't understand history. Everyone who's jumping in there, it's actually not going to lead South Africa. South Africa there will be chaos in South African politics, coalition politics. As I said, for a minimum of 15, around 20 years. Add 20 years to Floyd Shivambu's age. And then you will see where I'm going with this thing. At some point after 20 years, a force will emerge to take over as a hegemonic force that is going to lead South Africa. All of these people who are running around now, most of them will be no more. Jacob Zuma People will talk to him as an ancestor. They will go to his grave and talk to him and give him snuff, even though in his life he didn't smoke. But they will go talk to him and say, bless us. So, the MK is not part of our future. If you look at it through a historic prism. But here is the other thing about MK. The glue that holds MK together is Jacob Zuma. Remove Jacob Zuma from the picture. And
Sorry, you've made me laugh too much.
no, it's true. It's true. Oh, it is true.
Snuff is the best. That's your best line ever.
And you see, those who will go to his grave and give him snuff, by the way, they will make him even very angry because the chap never smoked snuff in his life. But on a serious note, if you remove Jacob Zuma from the MK tomorrow, tell me what will hold this thing together. Number one, the MK doesn't have a cohesive ideology. A cohesive ideology is important in holding together a political party. The MK is a mishmash of all manner of opportunists who are seeing it as a vehicle to power. They think, wow, this thing is growing. Let me run there so that when it captures power, I will be in the union buildings. That's what drives those who are running there. These people, by the way, come from different ideological backgrounds. So take a Floyd Shibam, for example. He tells us he's a Marxist-Leninist. That's what he tells us, even though I doubt that. Is MK a Marxist-Leninist party? No. Jacob Zuma is a traditionalist, a feudalist who believes that traditional leaders must rule. Even his lifestyle, you can see, he's got a Solomonic palace in the middle of poverty in Kandla. That's the kind of thinking. So ideologically, nothing coheres. Number two, Jacob Zuma, if you remove him, there's nothing remains. So I don't see this thing lasting, by the way. I see it falling apart the moment one of two things happens. Jacob Zuma becomes senile. Someone will have to direct it. Two, when he dies. And we all know he's going to die, just like you and I at some point will die. So, no, it's not a part of our future.
Yeah. The EFF, you've taken a lot of heat from the EFF. I now know how you feel.
Yeah, they say now, yeah. Welcome to my club,
Exactly. You're an equal opportunity offender. You criticize, and through your criticism, I think you have a hopeful view because you want each of those parties to become better, and you hold all of them accountable. But you've been one of the voices in our country where people have said, no, the EFF represents something hopeful. The EFF is on a growth trajectory in years gone by. And you've really sounded a warning against that. Do you think that recent events, the EFF's slight decline electorally, but now also, all that it's coming out of with these leadership fights, do you think that in some ways vindicates your perspective?
Yeah, you see, let's be detailed in analyzing the EFF and what made me to be skeptical from the beginning, because I was skeptical of the EFF from day one. Yeah, I was skeptical.
Yeah, I think we were on the radio once together, right at the beginning.
Yeah, with Julius and I. Yeah. And by the way, I'm probably the only analyst who was banned by the EFF. They announced it on radio. I remember Mbuyiseni, by the way. He's eating his own boots now. He was once on radio saying that no leader of the EFF will debate with Prince Mashele. What was the crime I committed at the time? That's Mbuyiseni saying it. That I didn't respect the leadership of the ANC. The EFF. So that's the crime I committed. That's Mbuyiseni, by the way. He was very angry with me at the time. Today, the chap is fighting for his life. But park that. Why was I skeptical of the EFF? One, from the beginning, I didn't buy this propaganda that the EFF was a force of the left. I didn't. Why did I not buy it? I did not buy it because I looked at the lifestyles of the leaders of the EFF before they formed the EFF and after they formed the EFF. Go to history and observe the personal lives of true Marxist leaders like Fidel Castro, even Mao Zedong, or even Lenin, Fanon, all of them. You will never find such leaders who lived the way Julius and Floyd lived before they formed the EFF. These fellows lived like billionaires. They were part of the corrupt elements of the ANC. And in fact, Julius, as a leader of the Youth League at the time in various positions, he made history. He collapsed a province economically called Limpopo. They looted the coffers of Limpopo with Castle Matale was premier at the time, to the extent that the national leadership of the party at the time of the ANC took a decision to go and take over Limpopo because it had collapsed financially. Now, you can't tell me such a person is a Marxist revolutionary. Lenin didn't do that. Castro didn't do that. So, that was before they formed the EFF. Even after they formed the EFF, by the way, just go and study and look at their lifestyles. They continued the same thing. So I saw through this propaganda that these chaps are about using the EFF as a vehicle to amass wealth and live like billionaires. So I understood that. That's why I said these people, forget about them. Secondly, they copied a script from Hitler. And I said it, by the way. And when I said it, obviously at the time I was dismissed. But I said it because I had studied the Nazi regime and how the Nazi regime rose to power and what the Nazi regime did when they were in power. Obviously, the EFF was never in power. But let me tell you, study the EFF, the way they organize themselves. You will see serious similarities with the Nazi regime, including ideologically, by the way. They told us that they were a Marxist, Leninist organization, but actually they were not. They were a national socialist party. National in the sense that they were very clear that they were a party of black people, representing black interests. They were very clear. A Marxist-Leninist party will never say that. Because Marx and Lenin were anti-nationalist. Clearly anti-nationalist. You will never find the writings of Marx that praise nationalism. So I saw that. So even their political tactics, the stormtroopers causing chaos in parliament, all of that, the only difference is that the EFF wore red and the Nazis wore brown. But the whole theatrics and the hero worship of the leader, it was there. So I said, whoa. These fellows, I'm dismissing them. They're not what they're telling us to be what they are. And secondly, they are not going to lead South Africa. And of course, I was dismissed. The rest is history. Now, look at where they are. Julius fancies himself a political strategist. I've heard him and say, I'm a good strategist and all of that. It's nonsense. The chap is ignorant of political strategy. Let me tell you, when you form a political party and you want this political party to have longevity and eventually to capture power, and you want this political party to cohere, never allow the original core that formed it to disintegrate. Julius doesn't know this rule. He has allowed the original core that formed the EFF to disintegrate. Once that happened, you must know the party is finished. This element, by the way, you go to other political parties, even in the ANC, obviously, those who formed the ANC in 1912 are no more. But those who have been guardians of the party, at some point, the older generation fell apart, right? From 2007, that all fell apart and then whole thing scattered in different directions. You can go look at all these organizations and apply this principle. You will see. COP, same story. Those who formed it originally disintegrated. And what happened to the party? History. The EFF is history because this basic principle, Julius is not aware of it. Yeah. Fact that Floyd is gone, Mbuyiseni is exiting, your father, Dali, is gone. Let me tell you, Julius Malema will remain holding feathers. The bird has long flown away. He doesn't understand that. So those who think that the EFF has a future, they don't understand political strategy. They're just dreaming. And what I know is that if I'm still alive, they will come back and say you were correct.
Sure. That's a lot to take in. So you're of the view that, because there are some who think, no, look, it was a tough year for the EFF, but they'll bounce back. You think this is the beginning?
No. I can tell you, with my eyes closed. And Julius, if he lives and I live, he is a man with a bloated sense of pride. I know he will never come back to me and say, but chap, how did you see this? Some in the ANC, by the way, have come to me privately and say, how did you foresee all this? He will not come back to me, but he will know when he is alone, sleeping somewhere, staring at his ceiling, that guy was right. I should never have allowed the original team to disintegrate. It's gone. It's not coming back.
What do you think are some of the key events on the horizon this year that we should be looking at as we try to assess South African politics in 2025?
We need to look at the big political players. Maybe let's start with the EFF. We must look at who else leaves the EFF.
Sure.
Mbuyiseni is not the last to leave. More will come. So that obviously will influence our politics in the sense that one of our biggest political players will become even weaker. Number two, we must watch internal ructions within MK. You know, there's a commonsensical saying that says there is no smoke without fire. And I've seen enough of smoke and fire in South African politics.
Yeah.
People are talking about Floyd being kicked out of MK. It's been circulating. A lot of it is rumor, but some of it comes from people who know what is going on within MK. Certainly, there are people who are not happy about Floyd within MK. In the first place, by the way, and I know enough of political theory, by the way, that drives political parties. When you form a political party, and suddenly someone who was not there in the beginning is parachuted to a higher position, you must know that those who were there before that leader is parachuted are extremely unhappy. And let me tell you what they are going to do. They will work silently to undermine that leader, and they may succeed. So let us watch what's going on internally within MK. My sense is that we are going to see cracks within MK widening.
Interesting.
The third thing that we must watch, ructions and succession debate related cracks widening in the ANC. I can tell you, these fellows who are in Cape Town celebrating 113th anniversary of the ANC.
Yeah.
As they sit there, their minds are flying high and wild. Many of them are thinking of what they are going to do after that celebration to undermine each other, including toppling Cyril Ramaphosa.
Sure. You think that could be on the cards?
Oh, yes, it is certainly on the cards. I have no doubt about it. I have already seen signs, by the way. You know, Panyaza Lesufi, don't underestimate him.
Sure.
This thing about killing Chris Hani, don't kill Chris Hani again, it's part of a campaign that is beginning to take off. I can tell you, people are already talking in the ANC as to who is going to succeed Cyril Ramaphosa. In 2025, that is going to become a big factor in our politics. We may also need to keep an eye on the DA because Steenhuisen is not very secure as a leader of the DA, despite the propaganda that you are hearing. There is a faction in the DA, and that faction in the main involves Helen Zille, that believes that Steenhuisen is not quite the right material to lead the DA. So I have no doubt that even on that front, they do spend long hours at night planning and conspiring as to how they can very peacefully manage Steenhuisen out so that he doesn't get the next term as the leader of the day. So I think politically, that's what we must watch. But here is the thing.
Yeah.
If you listen to me, if you are an ordinary South African, you are sitting somewhere in a village or you're sitting somewhere in Sandton, right? You might ask yourself, what does all of this have to do with me? And my answer is, it has something to do with you because these political actors have the potential to disrupt your life. They make decisions, so don't ignore them.
Yeah.
But substantively, this stuff has very little to do with South Africans because South Africans, this is what South Africans are worried about. They are worried about whether or not there is a new factory in their neighborhood that is going to produce stuff, sell it somewhere, and is going to create employment for them so that they can feed their families. All of what I'm saying, by the way, has got nothing to do with feeding families. No family is going to be fed because some fellows in the ANC are fighting or they are plotting in the DA. So, and that's the thing about South African politics. South African politics has divorced itself from the substance of the practical life of a citizen.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Well, Prince Mashele, thank you so much for joining us on SMWX to share your views on 2025, what we can expect for this year, and for being as candid as you always are. I think you and me are competing for who can be blacklisted by the most parties. So we'll see.
Thank you. You know, at last I've got a partner. I'm not traveling alone. Welcome. I look forward to the road with you.
Thanks for joining us again. Thank you for joining us. Like, share, subscribe, become a member of SMWX and help get us to 200,000 subscribers. Yeah.